concerned about, or like how to lift the hopping foot up when I'm doing my trapunto. And
Yeah, that's something I can show you. Oh, hi. Linda and I were just talking about some of the maintenance issues that you might have. We know that a lot of people worry about maintenance issues, and that's why we've made this DVD to try and tackle some of those problems that sometimes seem to be great, big, huge problems.
speaking of huge problems, whoa! Looks like our biggest problem is getting off at this machine.
Oh, I think you're right. As we get started with our DVD here, I want to talk about 3 laws of maintenance. They are: keep it simple, keep it simple, keep it simple. The reason why I say that is because sometimes we make adjustments that are not related to the problem that we're trying to solve. Many adjustments on the machine are not related to each other. So you may be going to an area that is not even related to the problem that you're trying to fix. Always recheck or so after each adjustment. You could very possibly be finished after one adjustment. There are times when you may need to call a technician, and for our benefit, this is what we'd like to have you keep in mind. What was the last thing that you did before the machine had its problem? Did you do something like change the needle, hit a ruler, change the thread, change the bobbin, make an adjustment of any kind? If you tell us what the last thing that happened or you did, then we may be able to solve this problem that you're having very quickly because we know exactly what to look for. We're now going to talk about how the machine makes a stitch. The top thread loops around the bobbin thread and pulls the bobbin thread up into the fabric as illustrated by this graphic. If you were to have too tight of top tension, then you could see that it would pull the knot not into the center of the quilt but to the top of the quilt, so then we could have a blue dot on the top. Conversely, if the bobbin thread was too tight, then we would have a red dot show on the bottom of the quilt. We want the knot to tie in the center of the fabric as much as we can. Another way to say it is the bobbin thread is a dormant thread and is pulled out of the bobbin by the top thread. Otherwise, it just sits there. Now let's see if you understand what we just said. If you leave the bobbin in the machine, or take a stitch. What will happen if you unthread the needle and take a stitch? As you can see, nothing happens. What will happen if you thread the needle and now take out the bobbin and take a stitch? What happens is the thread will wrap around the center post, and if you take multiple stitches it will just keep doing that, and then all that will have to be cut out of the bobbin area. To help you understand what happens as the machine takes the stitch, we need to understand that 1 inch of thread passes through the eye of the needle a minimum of 60 times before it's sewn into the fabric. In this video clip here, you can see that we'll put a dot on a given point of the thread, and as the thread travels down into the bobbin area, that dot is going to pass through the eye of the needle, go around the outside of the bobbin case, and then get pulled back up through the eye of the needle to the top again. That is approximately 3 inches of thread. Out of that 3 inches, we are only losing the length of a stitch, which if it's a big stitch is only 1/8 of an inch. Most stitches are smaller than 1/8 of an inch. we have just seen what happens with one given point of thread passing through the eye of the needle multiple times. So visualize with me what would happen if our top tensions are too tight. That's going to stress the thread. So I'm going to have Rick and Rick demonstrate that for you. Go, Rick. Good job, Rick. Okay, so what's going to happen there? It's going to seesaw back and forth through the eye of the needle, and it's going to cause something to happen. What's going to happen? Your thread is going to break. And if it breaks, what is the end of the thread going to look like? It's going to be frayed because it's not tolerating the eye of the needle. We want the least amount of tensions that we can get away with and still have a good stitch so that we don't stress the thread as it passes back and forth through the eye of the needle. We're going to talk about the adjustments of the top and the bottom tension and how they relate to each other. No amount of adjustment of the top tension can compensate for an incorrect bobbin tension. In other words, we can have more bobbin tension than we have the ability to overcome with the top tension. And if we overcome it, then it's going to be so much tension on the top thread that it will not tolerate the eye of the needle. Therefore, it's going to fray and break. We want the least amount of tensions that we can get away with and still have a good stitch. That's going to take away the stress on the thread. One of the things that we can do is to put thread lubrication on the thread to make the thread slicker so that it passes through the eye of the needle freely. You might have heard of putting thread in the freezer. That's also doing the same thing, changing the surface of the thread so it makes it slicker so it can tolerate the eye of the needle. The third thing that we want to keep in mind is that the larger the needle, cut down the because I'm going to dropped. If you your bobbin easy. Just the top tensions. Every direction the dots migrate. So you can see areas where the dots are prevalent, and as we change directions, then those dots disappear and then they reappear. If you see that scenario in a series of loops, that is a balanced stitch. It will not get better than that because every direction that we move the machine changes the bobbin tension, so our dots migrate. Let's analyze this stitching for a few moments. First of all, if I were to ask you what side of the quilt this is on, what would you answer? If you answered this is on the bottom, you would be correct. If I asked you if this can ever happen on the top of the quilt, the answer would be no. Why is that? Because the white thread is the bobbin thread. It is pulled out of the bobbin case by the top thread. If you have excess thread on the bottom of your quilt, it is only the top thread. You never can have excess thread coming out of the bobbin because it's pulled out by the top thread. If our stitching has consistent dots on the one side of the quilt or the other, that means that the top tension is either too loose or too tight. In this example, if this is the bottom of the quilt, then we would need to increase the top tension, which is the darker thread, and so it will pull up into the quilt and not have continuous dots. If this is on the top of the quilt, then we would need to loosen the top tensions so that the dot will tie in the center of the quilt. This is an example of the stitching and what it looks like on the bottom and also what it looks like on the top. The top looks relatively good, but on the bottom you can see that it's pulling straight line. In this case, we would need to increase our top tension so that we do not get that scenario on the bottom of the quilt. It's deceiving sometimes because the top will look good, and then when we take a quilt off and then think, wow, the bottom wasn't all that great, we could have checked that just by rubbing our fingers across the stitching on the bottom, and we would feel this straight line or bunching up like that and know that we need to increase our top tension to pull that up into the quilt. This is another example like the last one. The top looks relatively good, but on the points of the star there seem to be pulling in a little bit. This is an indication that the top tension is too loose, so it's being pulled to the bottom of the quilt. As we analyze this stitching, one of the things that we have come to realize is that on darker threads such as blacks, navies, reds, those kinds of things, that the stitch sometimes looks offset or mini zigzag. That's caused by the needle pushing the thread from one side of the needle to the other as we're pushing away from us and stringing the thread underneath the needle. We can help this scenario if we slightly cant the needle clockwise. There are 360 degrees in a full circle. We're talking about canting the needle 1 to 2 degrees only, and that will push the thread to one side of the needle all the time, and it will eliminate this sidestepping or mini zigzag. This is a good example only, and that will push the thread to one side of the needle all the time, and it will eliminate this sidestepping or mini zigzag. This is a good example to illustrate what happens when you use contrasting threads. So if you have a lighter thread in the bobbin and a darker thread on the top, you're going to get dots. You cannot get away from that. So that's something that you want to understand, that dots appear on the bottom of the quilt. They also appear on the top of the quilt. So if you do not like that scenario, then you'll need to use the same color thread top and bottom. For more information and tips, we invite you to visit our website at lequilters.com. When you go to our home page, if you'll look on the left side, there's going to be a section that's called Maintenance. If you double click on that, then that will pull it to the Maintenance Library. We're going to have monthly features on the maintenance page, so I think you'll find that helpful. So check with our website often, you'll learn something new. Now that we've gone through some of the theory of the sewing and some basics about how the machine works and some cause and effect, that's going to help you to understand what goes on with the machine. To increase your knowledge about this, we want you to go to each of the sections and get more details on making adjustments and why the machine works. And remember, keep it simple. In this section, we're going to talk about the bobbin case. The bobbin rotates inside the bobbin case. The bobbin case controls the bobbin tension. In our bobbin case, we have a no backlash spring. We have a tension arm. And here's a picture of a different style of bobbin case. What we are looking at is the bobbin case. This device holds the bobbin as it spins. It regulates the bobbin tension. No amount of adjustment of the top tension can overcome a too tight of a bobbin tension. Occasionally we may need to remove the no backlash spring because lint can build up underneath it. We want to look in this area. If lint builds up underneath it, it puts upward pressure on the backlash spring, which also increases the tension of the bobbin. The other thing that we're noticing is how flat the ears are on each side, because that's what holds it into the bobbin case. We're going to place it in the bobbin case so where the ear will drop into the slot on the side that we can see. Then it lines up with the other one, which is behind the lever right here. So I'm going to take my tweezers, come into the center, bow it backwards, push it down in to where it will slide in the slot, and then it should slide around easily once it's in there properly. If you just force the backlash spring down into the bobbin, it will bend the ears. If you need to change the tension arm, which is located on the side of your bobbin, then you would need to remove the two screws, the larger one and the smaller one. So the smaller one then is going to go into this hole right here, and then your large screw is going to go here. The smaller one is a tight screw. The larger one is the adjustment screw that actually compresses the tension arm. So as we screw this one in, it applies pressure on your thread right here in this area, and that's what's going to create your bobbin tension. To thread the machine, we will start at the cone and insert the thread through the thread lead-off holes. Here is the first one, then the one closer to the machine. We now go through the hole in this post, then forward to the eye loop behind the intermittent tension. Then we go clockwise around the intermittent tension, back to the sensor wheel, going behind, back around, then forward to the arm that has the 3 holes. We only go through the first and the last holes. Now go in front of the L bracket, clockwise around the tension wheel 1 full time. Then around again, this time going behind the check spring, back forward and underneath the L bracket, then up to the take-up lever, down through the 3 thread guides, and then to the needle. I want to show you how the intermittent tension works. It's screwed into the side of the machine here. If you loosen the nut here and unscrew it and pull it out of the machine, there's a cam on the inside of the machine that comes around and bumps this plunger, and that's what applies pressure to the discs, which applies pressure to your thread, so it fluctuates like that. If you need to make an adjustment, the adjustment is how far that the intermittent tension screws into the machine. So you would screw it in a certain distance, and then you're going to turn the machine. We want this to fluctuate between a 1/16 and an 1/8 of an inch, not more than an 1/8 of an inch. So that's about right there. So then what I would do is align this little eyelet back here at probably about a 5 o'clock position, and then we would tighten that nut. Once you have the nut tight, then you want to recheck and make sure that it hasn't changed its stroke. Okay, so that's about right there. You will also want to be sure the intermittent tension is threaded correctly. Be sure the thread is between the 2 discs. Do not wrap completely around the tension post. We're taking a picture here of the thread sensor wheel that's on the plus machines. One of the things you want to do is, if you're having problems with tensions, is make sure that this wheel turns nice and even. Also, one of the things to be aware of is that occasionally we can have these tension wheels split apart a little bit, so when the thread wraps around them, it catches in the little split part and then it releases, so it can give you a little tug on your thread. So you want to make sure that those are flowing freely. One of the things that you can do to check to see if it's flowing freely is to put thread on it and pull it. Make sure you don't feel a tug on it. We're going to talk about the main tension now, which is located on the front of your machine, just towards the needle. Let's talk about the check spring. I have my wrench in an Allen screw that is located on the black collar that you can see that's mounted against the sewing machine. To remove this whole assembly, you would loosen the set screw there, and then you can pull this whole assembly out of the machine. So I'm going to pull this apart so that you can see the different components. Here's the adjusting nut, the serrated edge. Now you'll notice that one end, this is serrated, and that end of this is serrated, so we want those to face each other. You have your cone spring, then the spring shield, then you have your felt, 2 felt washers, 1 on each side. This pin has a the check spring is coiled up on the inside of this. Now you don't normally need to take all this apart to change it, but I wanted to have you see the order in which all this goes back together. But if your check spring is broken or it does not have enough tension on it, then what you would do is loosen this set screw here on the side of the barrel. Then that releases that pin so that you can pull it out. And then your check spring is coiled up on the inside of the barrel. So if you need to replace it, then you would just work your spring out of the barrel. Okay? So to replace the new spring, you're going to feed the loop end through the slot, turn it, and put the coil down inside. On the shaft that goes in there, there's a slotted piece, which is, the slot is right here. And on your check spring, there's a coil piece that runs up through the center. So let's see if you can get a shot of that. So part of that spring is coiled around, and then it's bent and comes back up through the center. So what you want to do when you put your center pin in is you're going to match that coil piece that's coming back up the middle with that slot. So it slides in there, catches that piece, and so now when we turn our shaft, we're going to actually wind the spring up and put tension on it. So what we would do is turn our shaft until we get tension. Now this is a little bit difficult to describe, but we want enough tension where this can flip back up. You can get too much tension and you can get not enough tension. So I'm going to just adjust this until I feel like it has enough tension to pull the thread up. But it needs, the thread when it's sewed needs to pull that down, and then when the take-up lever is starting up to pull the thread out, the check spring helps take it out. So I'll show you how that works in a few moments here. Okay, now I've pressed the end of the shaft flush with the end of the barrel. So I'm holding it between my thumb and forefinger and applying pressure to it. Then I'm going to tighten the screw. And this is a fairly tight screw because we don't want that to come loose. Okay, now the order we put things back, we're going to put one washer, felt washer. Put the, let's see, put the right one on here. Put the tension wheel on. The other felt disc, the spring shield. Now you can see it has two directions. It's cupped so that the spring will set inside the cup. So that goes on. Then we put our spring on. So you can see how the spring fits in that concave part there. Then we're going to apply our serrated washer facing out, and then our nut screws on the end of that. And we're going to start by screwing the nut flush with the end of the shaft. Depending on how old your machine is, and if you have converted to the tension wheel, you may have a cone spring on here, and here's one that is thicker than what, in other words, they come in various sizes. If you feel like you do not have a lot of tension adjustment, in other words, if you turn it a little bit, it's too much. If you back it off, it's too much. Then you may want to consider getting a smaller or a less strong spring. So you can see the difference between this. To collapse this particular spring, it takes more pressure than it would this one. But if you change to a smaller or a spring that has less tension on it, then that can give you actually more range of adjustment, so that you can turn your adjustment 2 or 3 times and still have room to work with. Okay, I'm going to bring the machine back over here. We're going to replace this back into the machine. Now I'm going to place the hoe mechanism inside the machine. Now I'm going to turn it this way so you can see. The black collar, this is going to go in, and so if the tip of my screwdriver represents the black collar, I'm going to stop the collar about right there. So in other words, I've got about a 1/16 of an inch of the barrel showing on the inside. If I get it closer than that, then if I had my barrel right up against here and the spring moves, it's going to wear the spring out really fast. So I need just a little bit of space there. Also, the angle, I'm going to put it in get my space, and then I'm going to make sure that the angle that that top part of that spring is coming out is between 10 and 11 o'clock. And then we just go ahead and put our wrench on our set screw and retighten it. To adjust the needle bar height, we need to remove the front display. So we would take the 4 screws out of each of the corners of the display. That will allow us to move it out of the way. If you look inside the machine here, you can see that there's a hole drilled into the back of the machine, and there will be a screw that's exposed when your needle bar is at the bottom of the stroke. By loosening that screw, that allows us to move the needle bar independent of the machine. I'm now going to show you the proper needle bar height. In other words, how high the needle bar is set. Okay, so this needle is lower than it should be, but I'm going to just turn the machine to show you the proper placement. Now, if you'll notice, above the eye of the needle, right there where that arrow is, that has metal showing. So that needle is actually too low now. I'm going to raise it up just a little bit. That would be perfect placing right there. So I have no metal above the eye, but I can see the full eye, and the eye is from right there to right there. Okay? If I only saw part of the eye, then it would not be low enough. If I see more than the eye, then it's too low. So on this particular situation, I'm at the bottom of the stroke. Now notice how when I move that needle bar, it goes down and then it starts back up. I want to the very bottom of the stroke, right there. And now I want to physically move my needle bar to the right height. So I'm going to come in, put my screwdriver on that screw, take a hold of the needle bar, loosen the screw, and then physically move the needle bar to the right height. So I have no metal above the eye. And now I can tighten that screw down. And now that's set my needle bar height. To check the timing of the machine, the first thing we're going to do is to take the 4 screws out of the needle plate and remove it from the machine. We then are going to rotate the machine until the needle is at the bottom of the stroke. I place my finger on the bottom of the screw so that I can feel the bottom of the stroke. We're going to place the timing tool on the needle bar. The timing of the machine is raising the needle bar 2.3 millimeters from the bottom of the stroke. So this timing tool has an arm on it which is 2.3 millimeters. With the arm closed, put the timing tool around the needle bar and slide it up against the bottom of the machine and tighten the plastic screw. We then move the arm out of the way and rotate the machine in the direction that the machine sews, so the hand wheel turns clockwise until the timing tool comes in contact with the bottom of the machine. We want the sewing hook point to split the back of the needle. Right there is the point of the sewing hook. You can see that the sewing hook timing is incorrect on this machine. We wanted that hook point to be behind the needle. I'm going to put the point of the hook behind the needle to show you where the hook should have stopped if the machine were timed correctly with the timing tool in place. To repeat, on a correctly timed machine, when the timing tool is against the top of the machine, then this is where the point of the sewing hook should be. Let's time this machine. We first need to be able to get to the screws on the sewing hook, so we're going to rotate the hook until we can get to those screws. We then loosen one of the screws, rotate to the second screw and loosen that, and then slightly tighten it back so that when we turn the hook assembly, we can turn it on the shaft. but it's also tight enough so when we rotate the machine, the hook will turn with the machine. The next thing we do here is to turn the hand wheel so that the needle is at the bottom of the stroke. Now we're going to replace the timing tool. The timing tool goes around the needle bar, up against the bottom of the machine, tighten the screw, and open the lever. Now rotate the hand wheel clockwise until the timing tool body comes in contact with the bottom of the machine. Now we're going to rotate the sewing hook on the shaft so that it splits the back of the needle like this. That's the first condition that we want to meet. Once we have the rotation set, we're going to remove the timing tool and check the distance between the hook and the needle. This is more critical than the timing. The rotation timing can be off slightly, but this has to be perfect. What we're checking is the distance between the hook and the needle. So if we push on the needle and we see any backward deflection like that, the hook would be too far away from the needle. So what I would need to do then is to move the hook assembly forward until the hook is against the needle, or there is zero tolerance between the hook and the needle. If I push on the needle, it should feel solid. What I would do next is to rotate the machine back and forth to make sure that the hook is not deflecting the needle when it passes it. If it does deflect the needle, then tap slightly on the sewing hook assembly until the hook no longer deflects the needle, but where there is also no space between the hook and the needle. Patience is required here. There is one other area that we need to check, and that's the needle slot. The back part of the slot is beveled. Be sure that the needle does not rub the back of the slot. As you can see on this hook assembly, the back of the slot has been damaged by the needle rubbing against it. Three things need to be true in order for the hook and needle to be in the right place. Number one, the needle can't rub on the back of the needle slot. Number two, the hook can't deflect the needle. And number three, there can't be space between the hook and the needle. There is only a small space where that will occur. Adjust the hook front to back until all three of these conditions are met. Remember, patience. After you have the hook and needle in the correct position, the next step is to tighten the sewing hook screws. The way I tighten them is to rotate the machine so that I can get to one screw, slightly tighten it, rotate to the second one and slightly tighten that one. Rotate back to the first one and add more pressure, then go back to the second and add more pressure. Once we have enough pressure to hold the hook assembly in place, we can now bear down on the screws and tighten them so that the hook assembly cannot rotate on the shaft. We go through this process because if we try to tighten one screw completely and then tighten the other one, it will invariably move the sewing hook out of place. Just a note, make sure the screws are very tight. Some people are timing their machines often because they're not tightening the screws enough, so it's allowing the hook assembly to slip on the shaft. Recheck the machine after tightening all the screws to make sure the three conditions discussed are still true. The needle doesn't rub the needle slot, the hook doesn't deflect the needle, there is no space between the hook and the needle. The last thing that we're going to do is to replace the plate. I've put the screws in and screwed them down almost all the way. I want to be able to slide the plate around because we're going to center the needle in the hole that's in the needle plate. Once that's centered, then we can snug those screws down. They just need to be snug. This doesn't have to be a tight screw because we will often access this part of the machine for cleaning. going to talk about the rocking finger now and how it works. First of all, I'm going to rotate the machine and let you watch the rocking finger. You'll notice that it moves from left to right. When it comes to its most left position, it touches that little piece of metal right here and pushes on the bobbin basket and shuttles it back and forth. What it's doing is creating a gap right here at the top. When the machine is running, the centrifugal force of the machine keeps the right side closed. It is the rocking finger that opens up the right side and allows the top thread to pass through unobstructed. What I have done is I have pulled the red bobbin thread up and moved it into the slot that is in the back left of the notch. So now as you watch the machine sew, the needle goes down, and as it starts back up, the sewing hook passes behind the needle and catches the thread. You can see how it picks up the green thread, which is the top thread. The thread then travels across the face of the bobbin, clears the rocking finger at the bottom, and pulls through the gap that opens at the top. Now we're going to see an example of what happens to the thread when the rocking finger timing is off. When the needle is threaded, the thread is underneath the hopping foot and the bobbin thread is up into the slot in the back of the notch. We can hold the top and bottom threads straight out to the left and watch how the machine takes a stitch. Watch how the green thread passes across the face of the bobbin and is trapped by the rocking finger. Extra thread is pulled out when the thread hangs on the rocking finger and then pops through. That extra thread shows up as a loop on the bottom of the quilt. When we see the top thread hanging and popping, we know that the timing of our rocking finger is not right. In this case, the rocking finger is moving to the left too soon and trapping the thread. We also know the gap is forming too soon because the two are directly related. Again, if the rocking finger pushes on the metal too soon, the gap will form too soon. Also, if the rocking finger pushes on the metal too late, the gap will form too late. Now that we have discovered that our rocking finger timing is off, we need to go through the steps to fix it. First of all, we need to create the correct size gap. To check the size of the gap, I'm going to rotate the machine until the rocking finger arrives at the most left position. Now, let's make sure that the metal is pushed up against the rocking finger. Now we check for a gap on the right side of the notch. We adjust the rocking finger by loosening the screw on the bottom of the rocking finger. Be sure that you adjust the correct screw. Your screwdriver should be vertical when you make the adjustment. The other screw that you can see straight on here is not the correct screw. The gap should be about the thickness of an average thread. The following examples show common mistakes that people make when adjusting the gap. A shows a gap that is too large. In B, the centered tab is placed better, but still the gap is too large. If the gap is too big, as in the example B, or if we open the gap too much, then the tab will hit on the sides of the notch, making an excessive clicking noise. C is correct. At this point, we want to make sure the height of the rocking finger is not higher than the piece of metal. Also, we want to make sure that the rocking finger is not set back too far because the thread has to pass around behind the rocking finger. This is the correct position of the rocking finger. If you need to adjust the height of the rocking finger, we would need to loosen the screws located against the machine at the back of the rocking finger shaft, as shown here. You will need a 5mm Allen wrench. If you need to make this adjustment, you will need to recheck the gap and the timing after you have finished, as they may have changed. When the gap is the correct size, it is now time to tighten the rocking finger screw. When you tighten the rocking finger screw, you will not be able to push up on the rocking finger and tighten at the same time. You will need to turn your screwdriver in place. Be sure not to over-tighten the rocking finger screw because it will lock the machine up. This is not a really tight screw. The second part of fixing the problem is timing the rocking finger. To change the timing of the rocking finger, there is a collar behind here. This collar has two 2.5 millimeter Allen screws that you will want to loosen. Before we adjust the collar, note the spacing between the back of the hook assembly and the collar. We will need to have that same spacing after we have adjusted the collar. Loosen one screw and then rotate the machine in order to get to the other screw. Loosen the second screw and then slightly tighten it again. We want to make this screw loose enough so we can physically move the collar on the shaft, but tight enough so that the collar will rotate with the machine. By rotating the collar, we change the timing of the rocking finger. When we turn the collar counterclockwise, it makes the rocking finger arrive at the left position sooner. Turning it clockwise makes the rocking finger arrive at the left position later. As you'll remember, our machine was trapping the thread at the rocking finger and opening the gap too soon. So we'll need to turn the collar clockwise so that the rocking finger gets to the piece of metal after the thread passes. This will also form the gap at the top at the correct time. The fact that the rocking finger traps the thread helps us to know that the gap is off. If we get the rocking finger to trap the thread and then adjust the collar clockwise so that the finger no longer traps the thread, then we know our adjustment is really close to where we want it to be. So when we have properly timed the rocking finger, the thread will clear the rocking finger and then pull through the open gap unobstructed. See how that's working. I'm going to take several stitches so you can study that. It clears at the bottom, opens at the top to let it pull through. Once you get the timing right, then we want to make sure that we have the same spacing between the back of the hook assembly and the face of the collar. Be sure it has not slid too far forward or backward. If this is not positioned correctly, when you rotate the machine, it will bind in a certain spot. Now I will go back and tighten the Allen screws on the collar. Be sure to tighten one a little bit and then the other. If we try to tighten one all the way, we may move the collar. These are tight screws. Make the final check on your machine. If we're running properly, we should be able to run our machine and just have it chain the thread right out. We'll slow it down just a bit so you can see how that works. The reason why we would want to change the stroke of the hopping foot or how high it raises off of the foot so that we can move the machine over the fabric. If it's too thick, it hangs up, so we may need to have the hopping foot raise above that so that we can easily move it around. You'll always have to remember that if you increase the stroke of the hop or diminish it, you have to change the relationship between the hopping foot and the plate when it's at the lowest point. It always has to maintain 3 business cards thickness. so it will hold the fabric still while it's creating the stitch. To change the stroke of the hopping foot, we push down on this plunger right here, and the pin will drop into the slot on the cam. So as we turn the cam or the flywheel, it will drop down in the cam. Now it's locked, so now as we turn the hand wheel clockwise, it's going to raise the stroke of the hop. If we turn it counterclockwise, it's going to diminish the stroke. We've taken the inspection plate off of the side of the machine here so that I can show you how the adjustment for the height of the hopping foot works. This plunger right here has a pin on it, and the pin is going to drop into this notch right here. So when you position the notch under the pin and you push down on it, then the pin drops into there. Now as you continue to turn your hand wheel, it's going to change this cam in here, and that's going to change the position or the height of the hop. See, as I rotate the machine, the hopping foot comes up off of the plate and then goes to the bottom, and then it starts up. So we can change that height right there. So we're looking at the height right here that it lifts up off. So if we have a real high loft batting, then we can raise that up higher. If we have a low loft batting, then we can have it so it doesn't hop quite as high. Whenever you change the height of the hop, you also change the relationship of how close the hopping foot comes to the plate. So if you were to raise the height of the hop, then the foot probably is going to come right down on top of the plate, and we don't want that. So what you would do then is you would lower your foot to the bottom of the stroke. In other words, I'm not watching my needle, I'm watching my foot. It's come down to its lowest point, and then I will stop right there. And then we're going to come up to this little black rubber plug right here and pull that plug out. We have the plug out of the side of the machine now, and so inside of this hole right here is a screw. So that screw holds the hopping foot bar in place. So by putting your screwdriver in there and turning that screw, that releases the hopping foot bar so that you can change the height. Then what we're going to do is lower our needle down, or our hopping foot down, to the bottom of the stroke. And then we want to stick 2 or 3 business cards in there, depending on how thick your batting is. So I'm going to use 3. And I'm going to try and push those in, but see, I can't get those in, so that means I need to raise my hopping foot up. Okay, by loosening that screw, that allows me to move that hopping foot where I want to. Okay, so I'm going to slide the business cards under there, set the hopping foot down onto the business cards, and then I'm going to center the needle in the foot. So I'm going to remove this so you can see that a little better, so that that's centered. And then I would tighten the screw down to lock the hopping foot so that its height then is constant. We're now going to check the timing of the hopping foot. We want the hopping foot to rise as close as we can to the needle when the needle is in the lowest position. So if you'll watch this, as I start upward, the foot should be starting upward, and you can actually see a little bit of a downward movement of the foot while the needle bar is rising. So the timing of this particular machine is off. To make the adjustment for the timing of the hopping foot, you'll have a plug in the side of the inspection plate here, so you want to remove that. Then you want to lower your needle to the bottom of the stroke, and then as you look into the hole, you'll see one of the set screws that will be visible. If you'll turn your machine or the wheel counterclockwise to get to there's 2 set screws. This one we want to loosen, so we'll go in and loosen this one. Then we'll rotate back to the other set screw, because this one we're going to just we're going to put our set screw or our Allen wrench in the set screw. We're going to loosen it. We're going to keep the Allen wrench in the set screw and adjust rotate our foot, retighten, and then check to see what we've done. Okay, so now I've turned the cam and retightened it. So now when I raise the needle, see how much I've changed that? Before, when we started from the very bottom and started raising it, the foot was actually going down and then starting up. Now it's pretty much raising at the same time that the needle bar is raising. Your adjustment should be, if the needle bar and the foot raise at the same time, that would be good. It can be a little bit off. You can have some height movement of your needle bar before the foot rises, but I wouldn't have it much more than 1/8 of an inch before it starts rising. So I'm going to turn this a couple of times so you can see that motion. So from the very bottom of the stroke, our needle's starting up, and so does our foot starting rising. Once you have got that timing right, then you'll want to go back to your set screws and tighten, snug those down. The frequency in which we need to oil is, if we sew 4 or more hours a day, it needs to be oiled every day. The exception is your bobbin winder, which is once a month, and your bobbin race, which is every 2 to 4 hours of sewing, or if your bobbin case is getting warm, then you will need to put a drop of oil on the race. The one that's located into the motor is 10 to 15 drops. This one is critical because if we under oil this, then the bushing that's located behind here and down here is going to get dry. This also feeds clear up to a center point here in the middle of the machine, and then one all the way up just behind the needle. The next oiling point is our midpoint bearing, which is right here. We're going to put 1 drop there. On the bobbin winder we want 1 drop, and that only needs to be about once a month. Our next oiling spot is right here on top of the machine, which is a spring-loaded ball. So we're going to push down on that ball, and then that will allow us to get a couple of drops in. We then have 2 oiling points here on the machine, which oils the parts inside of the machine here. The front one will get directly to the needle bar. The one back will get onto these parts that move up and down. We then have another spring-loaded ball right here, and then the last one will be our bobbin race. I've taken the inspection plate off of the side of the machine. That allows us to get in here to oil these parts. Now, there's a wick that hangs down right here that splashes oil around here, but it's not a bad idea to occasionally oil these little knuckles in here. So you can see there's a spot right there, and as I bring this around, you can oil right here, and this slide bar here where it goes up and down. There's also a little oiling spot right there. You have a couple right on here. This wick here pulls excess oil from the bottom of the machine and brings it back up and recycles the oil a little bit. But that's not a bad idea, about every 3 months or so, to catch all of those oiling points in there. So anything that moves, any knuckle or joint, you want to oil that. In this section, we're going to talk about winding the bobbin. So I'm going to show you how to thread the machine up to that point. The first thing we want to do is go up through this thread lead off, so it comes straight off the cone of thread up through it. Then we're going to come over and go forward through this eye loop, It comes forward to the tension device, which is here. We need to go through this eye loop on the left side, goes down underneath and between the discs, and then through the eye loop on the right side. So I went through this eye loop, down in between the discs, and come through this eye loop. Now we're going to go forward through this pin. This is the pin that makes our bobbin wind even. And then we're going to take the end of the thread and wrap it on the bobbin. There's a couple of ways to do this. What we don't want to do is to wrap the tail end of it over the top of the thread that's coming in, because when the thread comes off, we are eventually going to start pulling the thread from the bottom of the wrap, and so it's going to hang up, and that can actually bend the little tension arm on our bobbin. So there's a couple ways to get around that. The first way is to push all the way to the back of the bobbin and then wind your tail coming forward. And then you're going to lower the arm until it just starts. So now as the machine turns, it's going to wind the bobbin. The second way that you can do it is to come over the top of your bobbin and then take your thread from the back and wind it over the top, from the back coming forward. This method requires you to have to clip this tail off so it doesn't become a factor, and then the same thing is you're just going to lower the arm down into there. We have an example here of a bobbin that is mushy. So in other words, if I were to squeeze it, I would feel mush here. I'll take my tweezers and push down. You can see how easily that compresses. If you have a bobbin that's wound like that, then you'll want to rewind that bobbin. You'll notice here that this one's been wound where the thread is sticking up above the edge of the bobbin, so this is going to cause different tension for the first foot than it will after that thread pulls off. This bobbin also looks fairly good, but as we squeeze it, it still is mushy here, so this bobbin would need to be rewound. This is a fairly healthy bobbin right here, so we're looking at it, for the most part it's wound even, but as we compress this, we'll compress it with my tweezers. You can see it's very solid there, and if you take it between your fingers and pinch it, it's very solid. That's what you want your bobbins to look like. I'm showing you a bobbin that's been wound uneven. So you notice that the thread is higher on this side of the bobbin than on this side. Depending on where that is, so if the machine were over here, then that means we're feeling too high against the machine. If it were on the other side or the machine was here, then we'd have the opposite effect. So I'm going to now go over to the machine and show you how to solve that problem. If our bobbin's wound where the shoulder is building up on the inside, what we'd want to do is lengthen this pin right here. So to lengthen it, we take this nut right here and loosen it, and then we can actually screw this pin in or out. So if it were building up on the inside, I would need to move this pin out a turn or two, and that will get the thread to go back and forth evenly. If the shoulder is to the outside, that means the pin is too long, so then I would need to screw it in a turn or two to get it to where it winds back and forth evenly. I'm going to show you how to adjust the bobbin release so that your lever kicks up and not overfill the bobbin. And there are also cases where it's not filling it full enough. So by loosening this screw right here on this arm, then you can reposition it, so if I lower it down and retighten it, then it will kick off faster. If it's kicking off too fast, then you want to loosen it and raise the arm up a little bit, and then as you push it down, then when it kicks off, it'll kick off at the right place. If the bobbin is over full, you either have to strip the thread off and waste the thread, or you can adjust this arm to get it to kick off so that it stops before the thread raises above the edge of the bobbin right here. If you need to make an adjustment on your bobbin winder, for instance, if you put your lever down and you turn your machine and the wheel doesn't turn, or if you can take a hold of your shaft and hold the shaft and turn the wheel and you can hold the shaft still, then that means that the abrasive wheel that's inside of the machine is not close enough to the O-ring. If you need to change the O-ring on the bobbin winder, you'll want to remove the 4 screws that are in the bobbin winder, and then you can just take it out of the machine. The wheel that comes with the machine is a blonde O-ring. The replacement O-ring is black. So just to replace that, you just peel one off and then just rotate the other one onto the wheel. Hi, I've been inside of here trying to check a few things out and make sure everything's okay. Look at this great big wheel here. I'm inside the cavity of the machine where the bobbin winder goes in, and can you see that big abrasive wheel there? That's the wheel in which your bobbin winder O-ring goes up against. So when your O-ring goes against that wheel, it turns that O-ring and turns that shaft. That wheel can be adjusted by the 2 set screws that we'll show you here on the top of the machine. Bye! So the first hole, closest hole to your bobbin winder on top, has a rubber plug in it, so you want to remove the plug. Then you'll need to look down in there and line your wrench up with the hole and loosen it. Now you have 2 set screws there also, so you'll need to loosen it, rotate to the second one. Then you want to find the set screw, put your Allen wrench in, loosen it, but keep your Allen wrench in the screw. What I do is I'll loosen it and I'll push the wheel clear back away from the O-ring. Lower my lever until it just starts into the top part of the bobbin here, and then I will physically move the O-ring or the abrasive wheel against the O-ring and then tighten it. Then I'll check it, make sure that when I turn it, it turns it and it's making enough contact that I can't hold this shaft when I turn it. But when I flip the lever up and it's off, I don't want the shaft to turn. So if you get the wheel too close to it, it's going to wind whether this lever is down or up. So we need to make sure that it's disengaged when it's up, and when it's down, that it has enough pressure against it so that it'll make good contact. Once you've got that set right, then you'll want to go ahead and tighten your screw more, rotate to the second set screw and tighten it. Now these need to be tight screws, so you'll want to tighten those down really good. You're looking at the inside of the bobbin winder, so I'm going to remove the wheel that has the O-ring on it so you can see how this mechanism works. As you lower the lever on the outside, you can see how that cam rotates, and then that little piece of metal goes up on the edge of that cam. That's in the wind position now, and when the bobbin gets full and pushes up on the lever, then that kicks off and it trips below that. So you can see that if you push it all the way down so that the lever is down all the way inside the bobbin, it has a difficult time of traveling all this distance to kick it off. So really we want to just lower the lever until it just comes over that edge of that shoulder, which in aligning the arm with the bobbin is just barely on the top edge of the bobbin itself. It will then wind, and as it gets full, then it kicks off of that edge. Also, you'll notice that on the spindle of the bobbin winder is the little locking spring. That spring ends up in that notch on the bobbin. But when you put your bobbin onto that shaft, you want to make sure that you don't align the slot with the spring. So if I align it, I can't slide it over it, and if I push it, I'll bend that spring. So if you rotate it a little bit and then push it on, you can see how it collapses that little spring, and the bobbin will slide right on. I'm showing you two of the bobbin winder wires. One of them has been bent. The other one is a straight one. When it gets bent up, then it won't allow you to slide the bobbin over the top of the wire. And if you push on it, you'll bend it even more. If they're bent too much, then you need to replace it. So I'll show you how to put the new one in. The wire is inside of the shaft here, and so if we take our quilting pin and push down on that, which pushes that little arm, collapses it, then that allows us to slide that out of the shaft. We're then going to take our new one, turn it, because my hole's up here, I want that little short piece of metal to be vertical. So we're going to slide that back into the machine, and then you'll need to take a little screwdriver and push down right here in this little slot area, so that little right angle will go inside, and then as you push it in, and it will just snap into the machine. To adjust the vertical lock, just loosen these two screws right here. That will allow you to move this in and out, because the holes in this bracket right here are slotted. So we would want about 2 to 3 business cards of spacing between the magnet and the table. Once we've made the adjustment, then we are going to hold the nut under here and tighten our screws back. To adjust the horizontal magnet, which is located on the right side of your machine if you're standing on the back, it has slotted screws and notches here. So what you would do is put that over the top of a couple of business cards, set the magnet down onto it, and then tighten the screws down. Then that will give the proper spacing for your magnet, so that when you push your magnet, it will engage, but be high enough to where the springs will lift it up off of the table when you release it. A good way to test to see if you have proper belt tension is to put your machine in the manual mode and on 10%, then hold on to the wheel and turn your machine on. You should see just slight slipping of the belt like that. If you see slight slipping, then that's just about the right tension. If you see a lot of slipping, then we need to tighten it. If you saw no slipping, then we may need to loosen it just slightly. On the newer models machines, there was holes drilled underneath the front display so that you can get to the screws to adjust the tensioning of the belt. I'm going to remove the belt guard and display so you can see the belt area. You normally would not have to remove the belt guard. This will still be attached, so you'll need to be able to hold on to that. Now there's 2 screws located right down here that are the mounts, and by loosening those 2 screws you can raise or lower the motor. We want some play in this belt. They're not set like a car. A car is quite a bit tighter than what a sewing machine is, but we need about a ½ inch of play in the belt here. We can access the belt by looking behind the belt guard. Insert the screwdriver and push on the belt to see how much deflection the belt has. We want between 1/4 and 1/2 inch play. So if we get the belt too tight, we can actually bind the machine up, and it's going to labor the motor. So there needs to be some play, but we don't want the belt to slip on the pulley here. So once you've loosened the screws, you can raise your motor up or down to get the right tensions, and then you just retighten the screws and then replace everything. When we're dealing with vibration on the machine, a lot of times we can adjust the front wheels to eliminate some of that vibration on the machine. What we want to do is find the spot on the table or on the track that gives you the worst vibration with the worst speed. When you're at that point, what we want to do is take the wheels in each hand and rotate them in place to determine which wheel has the least amount of pressure on it. Then we're going to take our Allen wrench and put it in this slot, and as we loosen this and rotate it, then that's going to raise or lower the machine. So if this wheel has less pressure on it, then we would rotate this so that it raises the machine or picks up more pressure, and then we can tighten it, and then that will help eliminate some of the vibration. If you've adjusted this set screw here and rotated that, that also can change your in and out portion. So what you want to do is make sure that you have a slight amount of room on both sides of the wheel. We don't want the wheel to rub on one side of the track more than the other, because that will bind the machine up. We're looking at the blue shock absorber that's against the machine. You'll notice that there's two nuts that are in place. The inside nut should be finger tight. We do not want to compress the blue shock absorber, because that will make it stiff and it won't absorb some of the vibration of the machine. The inside nut should be finger tight. So we just tighten that with our finger, and then the outside nut is going to tighten against it to lock it into place. By readjusting those or making sure that that shock absorber is not compressed can help eliminate quite a bit of the vibration.
Thanks for watching our DVD. I know I learned a lot.
Well, we hope we've been able to take a large concern and to shrink it down to size.
Oh, thank you. That's nice.
Remember, keep it simple. Take some of your big concerns and shrunk them down to size. Shrunk them, kill them, made them little bitty. Here, let me help.